My wife wanted an open marriage and paid a heavy price for it. She was shocked when she saw me with 3 women, and then, I'm 41 now, and over the past few months, I found myself in bed with 3 different women. It wasn't some random fling or a wild fantasy either. This was real. They were all beautiful, attractive, and completely unaware that they were part of a much larger plan. You might be thinking that this sounds like some midlife crisis story where a guy hits his 40s and tries to relive his youth, but this is far from that. This was about something else entirely. Revenge. Cold, calculated revenge on my wife. Before you get ahead of yourself, let me be clear. This isn't one of those uplifting stories where I learn a valuable life lesson, find peace, or some deeper understanding. No, this is messy, unfiltered, and completely unapologetic. If you're curious how it all played out, then buckle up because I'm going to take you through the whole thing, step by step, starting from the very beginning. I'm just an ordinary guy, nothing special. No fancy cars, no massive bank account, and no lifestyle that would turn heads. I've been married for 12 years. We've got 2 kids, a mortgage, and what most would call a pretty typical life. If you'd asked me before everything happened, I would have told you that my marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't falling apart either. I thought we were solid, like a pair of old shoes that had seen better days but still held up. Then came the night that shattered everything. It started off like any other night. I came home from work, tired but ready to relax. She had made dinner, something a little nicer than usual, which was my first clue that something was off. The way she looked at me across the table told me she had something on her mind. I wasn't prepared for what she was about to say, though. It wasn't a conversation about bills or work stress. No, it was something much heavier. As we sat down to eat, she started talking about how stagnant our marriage had become. She said things didn't feel exciting anymore, that she felt like we were stuck in a rut. Her words hit me hard, like small cuts slowly carving away at me. Now, I wasn't completely oblivious. I knew our marriage wasn't as thrilling as it had been when we first started dating. After all, more than a decade together, 2 kids, and full-time jobs will do that. Things slow down. That's just life, right? I figured we just needed to put in a little more effort. Marriage is work, after all. At least that's what I thought. But clearly, I was the only one who felt that way. She kept talking, going on about how bored she was, how predictable everything had become. I tried to stay calm, thinking maybe we could work through it. Maybe she just needed to get these things off her chest. But then she dropped the real bombshell. She said she wanted to open our relationship. Those words froze me in place. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. She kept talking, as if this was a perfectly normal thing to suggest. She wasn't asking for therapy or suggesting we try something new to rekindle the flame. No, she was talking about giving herself permission to sleep with other people. Her casual tone, as if she was discussing a new diet, was infuriating. The nerve of it, sitting there, across from me, telling me she needed freedom and space. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food. I just sat there, nodding along, pretending to consider her proposal. Inside, though, I was fuming. I wanted to flip the table, storm out, and never come back. But something stopped me. As she went on about how this would help our marriage, I realized something. Our marriage was already dead. I hadn't seen it before, but now it was clear as day. If your wife asks for an open relationship, it's already over. She had emotionally checked out long ago, maybe even physically, and now she was just looking for a way to make it official without feeling guilty. There was probably already someone else in the picture, someone she was ready to sleep with, but wanted to do it with my blessing. So, I made a decision. Instead of blowing up or confronting her, I stayed calm. I played along. I told her I agreed, that maybe an open relationship was what we needed. Why? Because I knew I could turn this around. She thought she had one, that she was getting exactly what she wanted. But I had my own plans. If she wanted to play games, fine. I'd play along, but I would win. That night, I couldn't sleep. She lay beside me, fast asleep with her earplugs in and her sleep mask on. I couldn't believe how smug she seemed, how secure she was in her little plan. We used to share everything. Phones, passwords, everything. So, when I slipped my hand under her pillow to grab her phone, I wasn't sure if she had changed her password or not. I took a deep breath, punched in the code, and, just like that, it unlocked. My heart was pounding as I opened her messages. My hands shook with a mix of anger and dread about what I was going to find. It didn't take long. There it was, right in front of me, messages between her and some guy. Some pretty boy with a cocky smile in his profile picture. He was younger, and from the tone of their messages, it was obvious what was happening. If they hadn't already slept together, it was only a matter of time. The flirtation, the emojis, the way she responded. It was clear she was all in, mentally gone from our marriage. And while they hadn't done the deed yet, it didn't really matter to me. Emotional betrayal cuts just as deep as physical cheating, and from the look of things, they were getting close to crossing that line. I took screenshots of everything. His messages, his Instagram profile, their flirty texts. It was all saved. I needed evidence, not just to confront her, but for whatever came next. But that night wasn't the time to blow everything up. I needed to think. I needed a plan. So, I stayed quiet, let her sleep, and began plotting my next move. The next day, I called in reinforcements. I have a tight group of friends, guys I've known for years who would have my back no matter what. I called them up, told them we needed to meet. It was late, but they came. We met at a park, far away from any prying eyes, just the five of us under the dim light of a few street lamps. I laid it all out for them. What she had said, what I had found on her phone, and how I was going to handle it. They were as shocked as I had been, but they quickly got on board. They knew I wasn't the type to make rash decisions. When I told them I had a plan, they listened. We talked it over, made some adjustments, and by the time we left the park, we were all on the same page. This wasn't just going to be about catching her in the act or calling her out on her lies. No, this was going to be a calculated, well-executed plan to turn the tables on her. She wanted an open relationship? Fine. But she wasn't going to be the only one having fun. I was going to play the long game, and when it was over, I would be the one holding all the cards. Over the next few weeks, I gathered all the information I could. I had my friends keep tabs on her little fling, and as expected, things progressed quickly. The guy was as clueless as he was arrogant. He had no idea what he was getting into, and I intended to keep it that way. I wasn't interested in confronting him directly. That would be too easy, too simple. No, I wanted him to keep going, to think everything was going his way. Meanwhile, I was setting the stage for something much bigger. At home, I played the role of the unsuspecting husband. I smiled, acted as if nothing was wrong, and let her think she had me fooled. She continued her little game, sneaking around, texting him while sitting right next to me on the couch. I pretended not to notice, but every time I saw her phone light up, it was another reminder of what I was about to do. Then came the weekend she had been waiting for. She told me she was going to visit her parents for a few days. I smiled, told her to have a good time, and waved her off. But I knew exactly where she was going. She thought she was being so clever, sneaking off to spend the weekend with him. But I had already set things in motion. After she left that weekend, everything was ready. She believed she had me fooled, that she could spend the weekend with her new fling without me ever knowing. But I had planned everything meticulously. The moment she walked out of the door, I felt a mix of adrenaline and calm wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. There was no going back now, and I was determined to see it through to the end. I had already called my friends, and within an hour, they were pulling up to my house. I wasn't planning to sit around and wallow in self-pity while my wife was off having her secret rendezvous. No, I was going to have my own fun. My friends brought along a few younger women they knew, beautiful, carefree, and completely uninvolved in any of the emotional baggage I was carrying. They were just here for a good time, and that's exactly what I intended to give them. The moment they arrived, the energy in the house shifted. There was a sense of liberation, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. We started drinking, laughing, and letting loose in a way I hadn't done in years. The house was filled with noise, with music, and with the kind of reckless energy that I hadn't felt since my younger days. It was chaos, but it was exactly what I needed. The drinks flowed freely, and the conversations became louder and more playful with every passing hour. As the night progressed, the women, who were all in their 20s, brought a youthful wildness to the evening. They flirted without inhibition, their carefree attitudes rubbing off on me. I found myself letting go of the stress, the anger, and the bitterness I had been carrying since the night my wife first suggested the open relationship. It was all starting to melt away, replaced by the thrill of the moment. By the time we decided to move things upstairs, the alcohol had done its job. There was a sense of freedom in the air, a feeling that anything was possible and no one was holding back. The women led the way, pulling me with them as we headed to the bedroom. In that moment, it felt like nothing else mattered. The betrayal, the hurt, the months of pretending everything was fine. They all disappeared, replaced by the heat of the moment. Once we were in the bedroom, everything escalated quickly. The women were giggling, shedding their clothes without a second thought, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I followed suit, my inhibitions completely gone. It was surreal, being in that room, surrounded by youthful energy, feeling more alive than I had in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the future or the past. I was fully immersed in the present, caught up in the reckless abandon of it all. In the back of my mind, though, I knew that this was all part of the plan. This wasn't just about having a good time. This was about revenge. This was about showing my wife that she wasn't the only one who could play this game, that I could turn the tables on her in ways she never saw coming. And as we lost ourselves in the moment, I could feel the satisfaction of knowing that I was in control now. I wasn't the helpless husband sitting at home, clueless about what was happening. I was the one pulling the strings. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any more surreal, it happened. The sound of the front door opening downstairs sent a jolt through me. My wife was home, earlier than expected, but home nonetheless. I didn't hear her footsteps on the stairs, didn't realize how close she was until I saw her standing in the doorway, her face contorted in shock and disbelief. In that split second, everything froze. The room reeked of alcohol, the evidence of what had been going on laid out right in front of her. There I was, in bed with 3 women, half naked, the remnants of a wild night scattered across the room. Her eyes took it all in. The women, the mess, me, and I could see the rage building inside her. She didn't say a word at first, just stood there, trying to process what she was seeing. And then, it hit her. The realization that this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing, that this had been planned, that I knew about her affair, and I had set this up to show her just how far things had gone. Her face went from red to pale in a matter of seconds, and I could see the devastation in her eyes as it dawned on her that she wasn't the one in control anymore. In a fit of fury, she stormed into the room, yanking the women out of the bed one by one, screaming at them to get out. They didn't put up much of a fight, too drunk to care much about the scene unfolding in front of them. They gathered their things, stumbling out of the house, giggling as they left, completely oblivious to the depth of what had just happened. To them, it was just another wild night, something they'd probably laugh about later with their friends. But for my wife, it was the moment everything came crashing down. After the women were gone, she collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face as she began to sob uncontrollably. These weren't the soft, quiet tears of someone feeling sorry for themselves. This was the full-body, heaving sobs of someone who had just realized they'd lost everything. She couldn't hold it together anymore, and honestly, I didn't care. The sympathy I might have felt once was long gone. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I took my time getting dressed, the whole scene unfolding beside me without any real effect on me anymore. The anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal, it had all been burned away in the fire of revenge. I was calm, almost detached from the situation. She had pushed me to this point, and now she was the one paying the price. The next day, I wasted no time in moving forward with my plan. I had already lined up a divorce lawyer, someone who came highly recommended, and I wasn't going to wait around. The paperwork was drawn up quickly. I had all the evidence I needed, screenshots, messages, everything. There was no way she could contest it. The divorce process started immediately. I wasn't about to let her drag this out, turning it into a long, drawn-out battle. I wanted everything over as quickly and cleanly as possible. In the days that followed, the house felt eerily quiet. My wife barely spoke to me, her shock from that night still lingering in the air. She knew the divorce was inevitable now, and I think part of her just wanted it to be over. There was no more fight left in her. The open relationship she had wanted so badly had blown up in her face, and there was no coming back from it. I had taken control of the situation in a way she never saw coming, and now she was left to deal with the fallout. As the divorce process unfolded, I focused on moving forward. I wasn't interested in dragging things out, and surprisingly, neither was she. She didn't put up much of a fight over the division of assets. We split the house, the cars, the money, and that was that. It was a clean break, and honestly, that's all I wanted. I didn't need to destroy her financially or make her suffer any more than she already had. She had already lost everything that mattered. Once the papers were signed and everything was finalized, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. The marriage that I had thought would last forever was officially dead, and while there was a part of me that mourned the loss of what could have been, the rest of me was ready to move on. I wasn't going to let this define me or keep me trapped in bitterness. I had gotten my revenge, but now it was time to focus on myself. In the months that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I hit the gym, got back into shape, and focused on improving myself in ways I hadn't had the time or energy for during my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and started to enjoy life again. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own happiness, and it was liberating. On the professional side, I decided to take some risks I had been too afraid to pursue before. I had an idea for a side business, something I had been thinking about for years, but never had the guts to dive into. With my newfound freedom, I took the leap, throwing myself into the project. It wasn't easy. Late nights, moments of doubt, and wondering if I was wasting my time. But slowly, it started to come together. A year later, the business was thriving. I wasn't rolling in money or living a millionaire lifestyle, but I was doing well. The sense of pride and accomplishment I felt was worth more than any material success. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something that mattered to me, and I was doing it on my own terms. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, about finding purpose again. With the divorce finalized and my life back under my control, I felt like I was finally free from the weight of my past. Everything I had once known, everything I had built with my wife, was now behind me. The house we had shared, the years we had spent raising our kids, and the comfort of a stable but ultimately unfulfilling life were all just memories. As I moved forward, I realized how much of myself I had lost during those years, how I had become so absorbed in being a husband, a father, and a provider that I had forgotten about my own happiness. It didn't happen overnight, but as time went on, I began to rediscover the things that made me feel alive. I started spending more time with friends, doing things I had neglected for so long. Weekend trips, spontaneous outings, and simple moments of laughter reminded me that there was a whole world outside the bubble of my former life. My friends had been my anchors through everything, and now, with the weight of the marriage off my shoulders, I leaned on them even more. I also found solace in working out, hitting the gym with a renewed focus. It wasn't just about getting into shape. It was about reclaiming control over my body and mind. The physical transformation was one thing. I shed pounds, gained muscle, and looked better than I had in years. But the mental clarity that came with it was even more important. Each time I pushed myself harder, each drop of sweat that hit the floor, it was like I was purging the last remnants of the man I had been. The man who had been betrayed, manipulated, and made to feel like he wasn't enough. Work became another outlet for this newfound energy. I had always been steady in my job, reliable but not particularly ambitious. I hadn't taken many risks, preferring the safety of a predictable paycheck and routine responsibilities. But after the divorce, something shifted in me. The fear that had held me back for so long, the fear of failure, of stepping out of my comfort zone, began to fade. I realized that if I could survive everything I'd been through, there was no reason to be afraid of anything else. I threw myself into new challenges at work, volunteering for projects that pushed me outside my usual role. I even started mentoring some of the younger guys, sharing what I'd learned not just about the job, but about life in general. It was strange, but in helping them navigate their careers and relationships, I found a new sense of purpose. That wasn't the only professional shift, though. The business idea I had toyed with for years, something I had always seen as too risky to pursue, became my focus. It was a tech-related venture, an industry I had always been passionate about, but never had the time or freedom to fully explore. Now, with my life back in my own hands, I took the plunge. I assembled a small team, reached out to potential investors, and began building the foundation of what would eventually become my business. The early days were hard. There were sleepless nights spent worrying whether I was making the right choices, whether I had what it took to succeed on my own. But with each step forward, I gained more confidence. The first few months were rocky, full of setbacks and frustrations, but I pushed through. Slowly but surely, things started coming together. The team gelled, the product took shape, and eventually, we started gaining traction. It was a grind, but it was my grind. I wasn't working for anyone else or living according to someone else's plan. For the first time in a long time, I was calling the shots. As the business grew, so did my sense of accomplishment. I wasn't chasing some millionaire dream or trying to prove anything to anyone else. This was about proving something to myself. I had lived so long under the illusion that my worth was tied to my role in my marriage, my job, or my family. But now I saw that my worth came from within, from the choices I made and the effort I put in to build something new from the ashes of my old life. On the personal front, I stayed single for a while after the divorce. I needed time to process everything that had happened, to heal from the betrayal and the emotional toll it had taken on me. I wasn't interested in jumping into another relationship or even dating casually at first. I wanted to learn how to be comfortable with myself again, to enjoy my own company without needing someone else to validate me. It was tough at first. The quiet moments, the evenings spent alone in my new apartment, forced me to confront feelings I had been avoiding for years. But slowly, I found peace in those moments. I began to appreciate the freedom that came with being single, the ability to make my own decisions without having to consider anyone else's needs or expectations. Eventually, though, someone came into my life in a way I hadn't expected. We met through mutual friends, and at first, it was just casual. No pressure, no expectations. She was different from anyone I had known before. Independent, confident, and not looking to settle down or rush into anything serious. It was refreshing to be with someone who wasn't trying to mold me into what they wanted. Someone who was content just to be present and enjoy the moment. We started spending more time together, but I was careful not to lose myself in the relationship the way I had in the past. This time, I was focused on maintaining my own identity, keeping my priorities straight, and not letting my happiness depend on someone else. She understood that, and it made things easy between us. There were no mind games, no manipulations, just two people enjoying each other's company. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt optimistic about my future. As for my ex-wife, I heard bits and pieces about her life after the divorce through the grapevine. From what I gathered, things hadn't been easy for her. She had gone through a series of relationships, none of which seemed to stick, and was struggling to find her footing. I didn't take any pleasure in hearing that, though. I had already let go of the anger and resentment I'd felt toward her. Holding on to those feelings would have only kept me tied to the past, and I had no interest in that anymore. If anything, I hoped she figured out whatever it was she was searching for, though part of me doubted she ever would. People like her rarely find what they're looking for because they don't know what it is they really want. I wasn't interested in her life anymore, though. She was part of a chapter one had closed, and I had no desire to reopen it. Looking back, it's surreal to think about how much my life has changed in such a short amount of time. A year earlier, I had been trapped in a marriage that was slowly suffocating me, unaware of how far I had drifted from the person I used to be. Now, I was healthier, happier, and more confident than I had ever been. The business was thriving. My relationships with friends and family were stronger than ever, and I had rediscovered the sense of purpose and passion I had lost along the way. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. That had been part of the journey, yes, but the real victory was in finding myself again. I had lost sight of who I was during those years of marriage, but now I had a clearer vision of the man I wanted to be. I wasn't perfect, and I still had plenty of work to do on myself, but I was moving in the right direction. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life doesn't always go the way you plan. But that's okay. Sometimes things fall apart, not because you failed, but because there's something better waiting for you on the other side. I had to lose everything I thought I wanted in order to find what I truly needed. My independence, my confidence, and my sense of purpose. The divorce, the affair, the betrayal. They were all just stepping stones on the path to where I am now. I don't regret any of it. It was painful, sure, but it was also necessary. It forced me to confront the things I had been ignoring for years, to face the truth about my marriage, and to take control of my life in a way I never had before. As the months passed after the divorce, I thought I had finally put everything behind me, but her voice, shaky and nervous, caught me off guard. It wasn't the tone of the woman who had confidently told me she wanted an open relationship or the smugness of someone who thought they could manipulate me. No, this was different. She sounded scared. She asked if we could meet up, saying she needed to talk. I could feel the unease in her voice, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to open that door again. Eventually, I agreed, more out of curiosity than any real desire to see her. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind of place where people go to avoid being seen. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked gaunt, pale, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her once well-put-together appearance was replaced by a frazzled, disheveled look. It was shocking, to say the least. This was not the same woman I had been married to for over a decade. Something was seriously wrong. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. The awkwardness between us was thick, neither of us really knowing how to start. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. Her voice cracked as she started to tell me everything, things I never could have imagined. It turned out that after we split up, her life had spiraled out of control. The affair with the guy she had been sneaking around with fell apart almost immediately after the divorce. He wasn't the knight in shining armor she thought he was. In fact, he turned out to be the complete opposite, a manipulative, controlling man who had used her just as much as she had used me. After their fling ended, she bounced from one toxic relationship to another, each one leaving her more broken than the last. But that wasn't even the worst of it. She had gotten involved with someone who, on the surface, seemed like a safe rebound. He was charming, sweet, and seemed to offer the escape she so desperately wanted. But as their relationship progressed, things took a dark turn. He became possessive, obsessive even, and before she knew it, she was trapped in a relationship that was far worse than anything we had ever gone through. She began describing the fears she lived with daily, how he would track her every move, demand to know where she was and who she was with. He would go through her phone, her emails, and even her social media accounts, controlling every aspect of her life. At first, I listened with a detached sense of disbelief. This was the same woman who had told me she needed freedom, who had craved excitement and adventure. Now, she was living in a nightmare of her own making. But as she continued, the story took an even darker turn. She confessed that the man she was involved with had a violent side, something she hadn't seen at first but became increasingly apparent as their relationship progressed. She hesitated for a long time before revealing the next part, her eyes darting around the coffee shop as if she expected him to walk in at any moment. Then, in a hushed voice, she admitted that the man had started abusing her, both physically and mentally. The control had turned into manipulation, and the manipulation had turned into violence. She showed me bruises on her arms, barely visible under her long sleeves, but unmistakable once she pulled them back. I sat there, stunned, not knowing what to say. This was the woman who had once held all the power in our marriage, the one who thought she could walk all over me. And now, here she was, broken, pleading for help. As much as I had hated her for what she had done to me, seeing her like this stirred something inside me. I didn't want to feel pity for her, but I did. She wasn't the same person anymore. The confident, manipulative woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone who was living in constant fear. She told me that she had tried to leave him several times, but every time she did, he found a way to pull her back. He had threatened her, telling her that if she ever left, he would ruin her life, expose all her secrets, humiliate her publicly, or worse. He made sure she knew there was no way out. She was trapped, and the fear of what he might do if she left kept her from making any real attempt to escape. As she spoke, I couldn't help but think about how far she had fallen. This was someone who had always been in control, who had always made sure she got what she wanted, no matter the cost. But now, she was a victim, and the irony of it all was not lost on me. She had wanted excitement, adventure, and a life free from the constraints of our marriage. But instead of finding freedom, she had found a prison far worse than anything we had ever experienced together. She looked at me, desperation in her eyes, and asked for help. It was the first time in years that she had ever asked me for anything. I sat there, conflicted. Part of me wanted to walk away, to tell her that this was her mess and she had to clean it up. After all, she had been the one to destroy our marriage. She had been the one to manipulate me, to lie, and to betray everything we had built together. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her, the part that had shared a life with her for over a decade, couldn't just turn my back. I agreed to help her, though I wasn't sure how. She needed a way out, and I knew that this was a situation that required more than just a sympathetic ear. I contacted a lawyer I knew, someone who specialized in cases involving domestic abuse and controlling relationships. I explained the situation as best I could, and together, we began to map out a plan for her escape. It wasn't going to be easy. The man she was involved with had access to her finances, her social media, and even her work accounts. He was deeply entrenched in her life, and getting her out of this would take time and careful planning. Over the next few weeks, we worked in secret, slowly unraveling the ties he had over her. I coordinated with the lawyer, helped her secure a safe place to stay, and even put her in contact with a counselor who specialized in helping victims of domestic violence. I wasn't sure why I was doing all this. Maybe it was because, despite everything, I didn't want to see her end up in a worse situation. Or maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to be powerless, to be trapped in a situation where you feel like you have no control. One day, after weeks of planning, she finally managed to leave. She packed up her things while he was at work, left her phone behind so he couldn't track her, and disappeared. I helped her get settled in a new place, far enough away that he wouldn't easily find her, and she started the long process of rebuilding her life. But even as she began to recover, the scars of what had happened lingered. She was no longer the confident, assured woman I had once known. The fear still clung to her, even in moments of peace. She was haunted by the possibility that he might find her, that he might make good on his threats. In the end, it was hard to reconcile the woman sitting in front of me with the woman I had once been married to. She had been so certain, so sure of herself, and now she was reduced to someone who barely recognized herself. It was shocking, not just because of what she had gone through, but because of how dramatically her life had unraveled. Even after all that had happened between us, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow for her. She had destroyed our marriage in her quest for freedom and excitement, only to find herself trapped in a nightmare far worse than the life she had left behind. It was a harsh reminder that sometimes, the things we chase after with the most desperation are the very things that end up destroying us.